Establishing an agricultural college in Iowa was a long process, from 1858 when it was officially approved to 1872 when the first class graduated. Iowa needed an agricultural college. It needed a school that was going to meet the needs of young people who were interested in practical education. There were some very important advocates for Iowa State Agricultural College. These three men were farmers, they were reformers, and they were the people who really believed that education needed to be provided for everybody.
Those advocates are Sewell Foster, Benjamin Gue, and William Wilson. So Sewell Foster was from Muscatine, Iowa, and he, along with William Wilson, contributed an article to the Iowa Agricultural and Horticulturalist magazine that outlined the earliest form of an agricultural college for the state of Iowa. And then we had Benjamin Gue come along, and he was a representative, and so he was one of the earliest persons that truly pushed hard in the legislature to have this agricultural college formulated.
It took 2 years for Benjamin Gue and others to persuade the Iowa legislature. On the 10th of March, 1858, Gue took to the floor and made an impassioned speech that finally turned the tide and led to signing the bill that established the school on March 22nd. Later, he wrote, "I spoke for half an hour in great earnestness. After I took my seat, a colleague came over and whispered, 'Young man, your speech has saved that bill.'" This grove and plaque commemorate his role as a founding father of Iowa State.
A year later, Story County was selected as the site, and a picnic was held to celebrate on the 4th of July on this spot in the northwest corner of campus. The feast included chicken, turkey, roast pork, mutton, fish, cheese, vegetables, fruit, pie, and honey, and guest hosted U.S. President James Buchanan, the selection committee, and the Iowa farmers who supported the idea. Later in 1859, the original farm of about 648 acres was purchased for around $5,000.
You had to have money for the school, and it was always assumed that some of that money would come from the federal government. It won't be until 1862 that the Morrill Act, the Morrill Land-Grant Colleges Act, is finally passed. A number of the southern states really did not like the idea of this particular act. They wanted their own system of education, and they were not in support. Well, of course, what happens is that the Civil War comes along, and the Civil War takes the southern legislators out of Congress. And at that point, the Morrill Act is passed.
The Morrill Act stated that education would be accessible to all, and that education would be practical, scientific, and logistically based. The Act actually designated lands in every state for the sale of those lands to be used as an endowment for a college or university. The state of Iowa was the first to accept the terms of the Morrill Act. The delegation of Iowa State as the Morrill Act land-grant recipient came later on. Many colleges actually were established and took the funds immediately. So that's why Iowa was the first state to accept the terms of the Morrill Act, but not the very first land-grant college.
During the years of the American Civil War, from 1861 to 1865, there's not a whole lot of building of colleges and universities going on. And so it's really not until 1865 that the state can begin thinking about the Land-Grant Colleges Act. At the time that Iowa Agricultural College came into being, Iowa as a state was really just coming into being. It was a time when state legislators and others were trying to think about what they wanted their state to become.
It was truly just a prairie. So if you can only imagine looking out from your horse-drawn wagon to just see miles and miles of prairie, literally nothing else.
In some places, the grasses were 6 feet tall, and underneath them were 6 feet or more of roots. On top of that, the whole central part of the state was very, very swampy, and they had not yet learned how to drain those kinds of swamps successfully. So this was going to be a place that was going to challenge farmers.
So the farmhouse was built in 1860. So it was the very first college building, and it stands today as a testament to that early contribution to practical education. The very first residents of the farmhouse were the model farm caretakers.
The very first university building, college building that you would recognize as such was Old Main.
So Old Main would have been meeting a challenge that was early on in the college's years of housing students. Where do we put them when they come to campus? How do we have classes in a prairie?
The original Old Main was completed in 1868, and it stood right about here, where Beard Cheer is today, with 2 wings added over the next few years. For the earliest classes, Old Main, known then as the main building since it wasn't old yet, contained all of college life: living quarters for students and faculty, classrooms, labs, dining hall, laundry facilities, and a library, chapel, and museum.
Also in 1868, the university's first president was appointed, Adonijah Welch. Welch was there to greet a preparatory class of students that fall and the first official class when they arrived in the spring of 1869. In those early years, the semester ran from March to November, so students could teach during the year to earn money and also to help out at home.
The students who were able to come to Iowa State College were fortunate in that they could be spared by their parents. And being able to send a child off to school, to take them off the farm and to send them away for large portions of the year to school was a bit of a sacrifice for families.
And so this big group of people all of a sudden emerged on the prairie in a land where there was very little preparation for them, let's be honest. And they were a part of making history.
The opening of the college took place on March 17, 1869, with an estimated crowd of 1,200 people. The keys to the college were presented to President Welch, who went on to give an inaugural address about his vision of the college.
From the very beginning, Iowa State College was imagined as a place where women could go to school as well as men. And people in the state legislature thought it was important for young women to be trained so that they could be better wives and mothers, but also so that they could take up the job of being partners to their husbands on the farm. But a number of them also ended up going on to be professionals. Life at Iowa State College was really kind of difficult in the beginning. It was a small campus on a windswept prairie. Ames was its own little town with 650 people, and it was miles away across mud much of the time. It was a lot of hard work. They had their jobs and they had their classes, although if you read some of the early histories of the place, you'll discover that they had a lot of blueberry pie. Students arrived with their own ticks, were big envelopes that you put straw in to sleep on. The buildings were cold.
So life for students and faculty were a scheduled day, and it was governed by the college bell. So the college bell originally had sat in the belfry in Old Main, but its weight is believed to have caused the belfry to somewhat collapse, so they moved it to the ground. Eventually, the bell was cracked and they had to replace it. And that bell eventually moved out of favor after the Campanile came up, actually. And in time, that bell became known as the Victory Bell.
The Victory Bell, now located at Jack Trice Stadium, guided days that started at 7 a.m. with 3 hours of campus labor, followed by study time until noon, classes from 1:30 to 5, and more evening study hours. Courses were taught in agriculture and mechanical arts, rhetoric, horticulture, German, algebra, arithmetic, bookkeeping, geography, and music.
In November of 1872, 26 of these hardworking students were the first to graduate from the Iowa Agricultural College, 24 men and 2 women. The exercises included each student delivering an oration, musical interludes, and an address by President Welch that was 66 handwritten pages. The graduation events lasted 4 days, leading up to the official commencement exercises on November 13th, which started at 2 o'clock and went well into the evening.
The class of 1872 turned out to be a very distinguished class of alumni.
Some of the earliest members of the class were extremely distinguished. Maddie Locke would go on to be a globetrotter and educator. She would marry John Macomber, who was a professor and also a lawyer in Des Moines. Another professor, Orange Howard Cessna, would give 30 years of service back to Iowa State as both its chaplain and again a professor of religious studies. Edgar Stanton iconically donated the funds for the Campaneles construction as well as the Carillon to be a memorial to his wife's memory. But he also gave back in years of service, completing many, many roles for Iowa State's university's success. Another member of the first class, Laverne Noyes, would give back through the successes of his businesses as well as his philanthropy. He would donate the funds for the creation of Lake Laverne, an icon of campus.
Members of the class of 1872 were as generous to Iowa State as they were accomplished, and their spirit of loyalty, innovation, and philanthropy lives on in some of our most cherished campus places.
These are the qualities that connect our Iowa State community, past and present, and that will guide us into the future.